Don't you have any more money? Then you should just go back to the country. This isn't a place for freeloaders." Those were the last words they ever said to me. I was 79 years old. For 15 years I had lived with them. For 15 years, I had given them every penny of my Social Security checks, cooked every meal, and cared for my grandson day in and day out. And in return, all I got was that one sentence. I did not cry. I simply, quietly, laid my hand on the deed to the house that was still in my name. And then, I began to prepare for a departure that none of them could have ever imagined. This is my true story, and what I am about to tell you now. It might just change someone's life. This is the story of the quiet rebellion of a 79-year-old mother. My name is Margaret. I am 79 years old. I was born and raised in Iowa. My earliest memories are of cornfields stretching out to the horizon, so vast they seemed to touch the sky. In the mornings, I'd cling to my mother's hand as we walked out to the fields, and in the evenings, I'd follow in my father's tired footsteps on the way back home. That was my world. We were a farming family, and while we were never wealthy, we had more love than anyone I knew. There was an abundance of it. From my youngest days, I grew accustomed to the rhythms of that life, the sound of the earth being turned by the plow, the sweet, dusty smell of hay after the harvest, and the taste of meals earned with sweat and sometimes with tears. My father always used to say, if you want to live as a decent human being, the first thing you have to be is honest. We may be poor, but we must never be cheap. Those words live inside me still. After I graduated from high school, with nothing but a single cloth suitcase and a heart full of hope, I moved to New York City. My first job was at a garment factory in Queens. I lived in a tiny apartment, crammed in with 2 other girls. The pay was next to nothing, but every single month, I managed to send a little bit of money back home to my parents. When I was 28, I married my husband, Arthur. He was an electrician, a gentle and quiet man. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and together we built a modest but happy life. I'll never forget the joy we felt the day we finally bought our own little house in Levittown, after years and years of saving every penny. It was a feeling like no other, a feeling of having truly made something of our own. But then, Arthur got sick. It was terminal cancer. I will never, ever forget that day at the hospital. The way the doctor slowly shook his head, the way Arthur squeezed my hand so tightly and whispered to me, "I'm not afraid of dying," he said. "I'm just afraid of leaving you all alone." He passed away when I was 51. All that was left to me was our son, who was in college, and the little house filled with all our memories. But I had no time to cry. I had no time for grief. I worked a part-time job at the grocery store during the day. At night, I did piecework, assembling little cardboard boxes for a local factory. When I needed more, I took a job cleaning the local school. I poured all of my energy, all of my youth, into raising my son. I never bought myself new clothes. I never went out with friends. I couldn't even allow myself the luxury of catching a cold. If I fall, I would think to myself, who will be there to protect my boy? That single thought was all I needed to keep me moving forward, my eyes fixed only on the path ahead. Eventually, my son, Michael, graduated, found a good job, and met a wonderful young woman. He got married. I was so happy for him that I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. Finally, I thought to myself, all the years of hardship have been worth it. I truly believed it from the bottom of my heart. So when he and his wife, Susan, asked if they could move in with me, I didn't hesitate for a second. He nodded right away. To grow old surrounded by family, I thought, that alone is enough to make a person happy. That's what I truly believed, to make things easier for them down the line. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I agreed to add their names to the deed, making it a joint title. I kept just one small thing for myself. My name remained as the primary legal owner. It was just a little bit of caution, a quiet assertion of my own small, rightful claim to the home I had spent my life working for. I never once asked for anything in return. But I never, not in my wildest dreams, imagined that this one small act would become the very reason I would one day be seen as nothing more than a nuisance. As the months turned into years, I began to notice a change. In their eyes, I was no longer the mother who sacrificed everything for her family. I had become something else entirely. I was a walking bank account. I was the cook. I was an unpaid housekeeper. Everything changed for good when my money started to run out. Over the years, I had paid for new furniture, for my grandson's preschool tuition, even for a full kitchen remodel. But as my savings account dwindled, so did the respect they showed me. They never said it out loud, of course, but I could see it in their eyes, in the way they moved around me, in the tone of their voices. It was all there. I remember one evening, sitting at the dinner table, quietly eating my plate of cold leftovers and boiled vegetables, while Michael and Susan chattered excitedly about their vacation plans and the new car they wanted to buy. Am I the head of this household? I asked myself. Or am I just a guest who has overstayed her welcome? There were many nights like that. Still, I said nothing. I'm an old woman, I would tell myself, trying to believe it. As long as the children are happy, that's all that matters. I have no interest in blaming them for the past, but one day, a question just popped into my head, a question I couldn't push away. Was this life, my life as a mother, was it all meant to end like this? To be looked down upon, to be made to feel so small? At first, living with Michael and Susan was a truly heartwarming experience for me. My little house in Levittown, once so quiet, was suddenly filled with life and noise. There was the babbling of my grandson, Leo, the clatter of pots and pans from the kitchen, and the soft shuffle of my slippers on the floor every morning as I left for the market. Every one of those sounds felt like a little piece of happiness. To this day, I've kept my habit of waking up at 5 o'clock every morning. I would make breakfast for the family, pack a lunch for Leo to take to preschool, and then clean the entire house from top to bottom. I may have been getting older, but I never wanted to be a burden on anyone. In fact, what I wanted more than anything was to be a useful, contributing member of the family. I gave them $400 from my Social Security check every single month for groceries. It wasn't a huge amount, I know, but it was the best I could do. It was my contribution. I did all the housework, all the little nameless chores, and I did it without question. I never once complained. I never expected to be thanked. I just wanted to feel like I had a place inside my own family. That was all I ever wanted. I can still see it so clearly in my mind. In the afternoons, I would go to pick up Leo from preschool. He would run to me, his little backpack bouncing on his shoulders. He'd throw his arms around my neck, plant a wet kiss on my cheek, and shout with all his might, "Grandma, I got a gold star today." Moments like that, they made me feel that I was still needed, that my life still had meaning. They were what kept me going. But then, a small incident happened, and after that, everything changed. One autumn morning, I slipped in the bathroom. It wasn't a bad fall, just a small one, but at my age, even a simple bruise can ache for a month. I hurt my lower back, and the doctor told me I needed to stay in bed and rest for at least 2 weeks. At first, I expected someone to be worried. I thought they would ask, "Are you okay, Mom? Or is there anything we can do?" I waited to hear those words. But that's not what happened. No one said a word. Not a single word. My days passed in an unnerving silence, as if I wasn't even there. There were no words of concern. There was no eye contact. The meals I had prepared and left in the refrigerator sat untouched. Susan took Leo to school herself, and I just lay in my room, all alone, listening to the sound of their footsteps passing by my door in the hallway. I tried not to feel lonely. I tried so hard. "They're just busy," I told myself. "I'm just being too sensitive." That's what I kept repeating in my head. But one day, I had to drag myself out to the living room just to get a glass of water. Susan was sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone. She didn't even look up at me as she murmured, "I hope you get better soon, Margaret, so you can be useful again." No one can afford to support someone who just lies in bed all day. I just stood there, frozen. It was only for a few seconds, but in that moment, it felt as if my heart had simply stopped beating. I laughed. Or maybe it was more that I had no other choice but to laugh. It was a bitter, hollow kind of smile. Without saying a single word, I turned and quietly went back to my room. That night, I couldn't sleep. All the days I had spent in this house, all the years, they all came floating back into my mind. I remembered the day I gave them $3,000 for the kitchen remodel. I remembered the day Susan said, "We really need a new refrigerator," and I silently transferred the money from my account without a second thought. I remember giving my grandson, Leo, a $100 bill for his birthday and whispering to him, "Let's just say this is from Mommy and Daddy, okay?" All of it, every last sacrifice, had been for my family. And now? Now I was just the person who can't do anything, so we don't need her? The next morning, I opened the old wooden dresser in my room. I took out every single document I had that was related to this house. There was a copy of the notarized deed, a thick bundle of receipts, and then the deed transfer agreement from 2009. I had kept it all these years. I always told myself it was just a cautious habit, nothing more. I spread the papers out on my bed, and I went through them one by one. My old eyes made the letters blur, and my hands were trembling, but I took my time, reading every single word with care, and then I found it. A single sentence. My heart began to pound in my chest. The grantor, Margaret, hereby retains a life estate in the property, including the full right of use, occupancy, and possession for the remainder of her natural life. The property may not be sold, leased, mortgaged, or otherwise encumbered without the express written consent of the grantor. I couldn't move for a long time. All this time, I had felt as though I had given everything away. But the truth was, I still had rights. The right to live in this house. The right to say no, even if they told me to get out. I carefully folded that agreement, placed it in a fresh envelope, and locked it away in a drawer. And in that moment, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. A day might come when this single piece of paper is the only thing that can protect me. I haven't fought back yet. I haven't blamed anyone. I haven't confronted them. Instead, I have simply begun to watch, to observe every word, every glance, every action, because I know something now. This is not the end of my story. That night, the night I found that clause written into the 2009 deed, I couldn't sleep a wink. I just lay there, staring up at the old ceiling, my eyes tracing the faded cracks in the plaster, cracks that had grown over the long passage of time. No one else ever noticed them, but to me, they looked just like the fractures in my own heart, spreading quietly but surely. Memories came flooding back, one after another. I remembered the day I signed that transfer agreement. My son, Michael, and his wife, Susan, were sitting across from me at the dining room table. Michael was smiling. "It'll just be more convenient for the future, Mom," he'd said, "to have it as a joint title." Susan had gently added some vegetables to my bowl, her voice so soft and kind. "Please, Margaret, live with us and don't you worry about a thing. This house is your house, just as much as it's our house." And I believed them. I signed the paper without a single doubt in my mind. This is for the best, I thought to myself, and I smiled, a genuine smile from the bottom of my heart. Back then, I never could have imagined that more than a decade later, I would be reading that same document again, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. But life doesn't wait for you to be ready. The next morning, I placed a copy of the deed in a small cloth tote bag and made my way to a law office near the Hempstead train station. It was the same firm where I'd had a simple will drawn up a few years back. I didn't have an appointment, but the young lawyer who agreed to see me, a Mr. Evans, had a calm voice and eyes that truly listened. I explained my situation and handed him the document. He quietly turned the pages, reading in silence for several minutes. He looked up. "Mrs. Miller," he said, using my married name, "according to this agreement, You still hold 50% ownership of the property. And more importantly, there's this clause here in Section 6. It states that you have the right to live in this home for the rest of your life. Any sale, lease, or loan against the property requires your written consent. I just nodded, saying nothing. I could feel my heart racing, but I kept my expression perfectly calm. If I feel that I'm being mistreated in my current living situation, I asked, my voice small but firm, or that I'm being taken advantage of, what can I do? Mr. Evans nodded slowly. If it can be proven that the agreement was signed under emotional duress, or that you are now being subjected to provably unjust treatment, it is possible to challenge the validity of part or all of the contract. He leaned forward slightly. The key, he said, is evidence. I clutched the edge of my bag and bowed my head deeply. Thank you. The journey home felt heavy, but I didn't say a word to anyone. My face was the same as always, and yet, inside of me, a small flame had quietly been lit. It wasn't a flame of anger. It was the flame of an awakening. From that day on, I began to observe. I paid attention to who said what during dinner. I listened to the conversations between Michael and Susan when they thought I wasn't there. I noted how cold and tired their eyes looked whenever they glanced in my direction. I committed it all to memory, engraving it on my heart. I started keeping all the payment records for household expenses, the electric bill, the water bill, receipts for groceries and cleaning supplies. For everything I paid for with my debit card, I took a picture of the statement, printed it out, and filed it away where no one would ever find it. I also bought a small, green notebook. Every day, I would quietly write down the things that had hurt me, not to blame anyone, but so I would not forget. February 15th. Scalded my hand with hot water while washing the dishes. Susan saw it happen, but she didn't say a word. Koplik. Ka. February 18th. Michael looked at the envelope from the Social Security Administration and said, "Mom, are you still getting $850 a month?" His voice sounded like he was talking to an ATM. February 22nd. I bought Leo a $100 toy robot for his birthday. That night, Susan whispered to me, "Please don't do things like that anymore. We don't want him getting used to expensive gifts." See after and hafters, see afters. The ink on the page, still wet, was now mixed with the small, silent tear that fell from my cheek. I wasn't writing these things out of hatred. I just didn't want to forget how I felt. And I started taking screenshots of the family group text. We need to start thinking about Mom's living situation. If only we had one more room. They never said it to my face, but their intentions were slowly coming into focus. One night, I sat in my dark room, holding that little notebook to my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I just sat there quietly, sensing the presence of a future I did not want to believe was coming. But I won't be caught off guard again, because I, who once believed so blindly, now understand that I must be prepared. I made 3 copies of the 2009 agreement. 1 copy I kept at home. 1 copy I gave to Mr. Evans. And the 3rd copy? I tucked it deep inside the old wooden chest where I kept my husband's belongings, and I locked it away in a small drawer that still had its key. The time to act has not yet come. But I know, with a certainty that has settled deep in my bones, that a day will come when they try to push me out of this house, this home I built with my own hands and my own heart. And when that day comes, I will not be silent anymore. I am in no hurry. I will wait. And I will continue to document every careless word, every unconscious glance, every single day that I live as a shadow in this house. It is all, without them ever knowing, becoming irrefutable evidence. No one knows. No one knows that this 79-year-old mother is now quietly making preparations they could never, in their wildest dreams, imagine. As time wore on, the truth began to settle over me, slowly, like a fine layer of dust covering every familiar surface in my life. I was becoming an outsider in my own home. My presence was an inconvenience. a disruption to the life they were trying to build without me. Whenever I walked into a room, the conversation would come to an abrupt, unnatural halt. The easy laughter would vanish from the air, replaced by a strained silence that felt heavier than any argument. At the dinner table, a place was no longer set for me. I was expected to find my own plate, my own fork, after they had already served themselves. I remember one rainy afternoon in March. It was a cold, dreary day, the kind that gets into your bones. To bring a little warmth into the house, I decided to make my grandson Leo's favorite meal, a slow-cooked pot roast, the kind my own mother used to make. I spent hours on it, letting the meat grow tender and the vegetables soak up the rich, savory broth until the whole house was filled with the comforting aroma. I carefully arranged it on a platter and set it in the middle of the table. I called out gently, "Leo, sweetie, Grandma made that pot roast you love so much." His eyes lit up like a pair of bright stars. He scrambled to the table, his little hands reaching for a fork, his face a perfect picture of joy. But just as he was about to take a piece, Susan's voice cut through the air from behind him. "You had that just the other week, didn't you? Let's have something different tonight, honey." Leo froze, his gaze flickering between me and his mother, his small face etched with confusion. I don't blame Susan for her words. I never have. But in that moment, for the very first time, as I watched the beautiful meal I had prepared with so much love sit untouched, growing cold in the center of the table, I understood. After that, I started noticing all the other small changes, the quiet ways they were erasing me from the landscape of our home. My old wooden dresser, a wedding gift from my parents, was shoved into a dark corner of my room to make way for Michael's new, oversized bookshelf. The little desk where I used to sit and write letters was dismantled and stored. In the garage, in its place now stood a sleek black treadmill that no one ever seemed to use. My bedroom. A small, damp room at the back of the house that never got much. Sun was suddenly fitted with thick, heavy blackout curtains. "It's for your privacy, Mom," they said, but it felt more like they were trying to block me out, to hide me away from the rest of the world, from the light. I never argued. I never said a word in protest. I simply watched as, piece by piece, my existence in that house shrank, growing smaller and smaller until I felt like I could barely breathe. It wasn't just about the physical space. It was my very reason for being there, my purpose, that was fading away. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the words were sharp and clear. "How much do we need for the deposit at that private international school? We're going to have to rearrange our finances. What can we do about the assets for the loan application?" They never asked me directly. They never included me in their plans, but they no longer bothered to hide them from me either. I suppose I had become like an old, drafty window in the house. A window they wouldn't bother removing right away, but one that nobody ever thought to open anymore. One evening, as I was lying in bed, I could hear Michael's voice on the phone, drifting through the thin wall that separated our rooms. "The title is joint," he was saying, "but Mom still has veto power. It's honestly a pain." I wish there was a way to sort it all out legally. I mean, she's getting older, and we have to be prepared for, just in case. Just in case. I wasn't sure exactly what he meant by that. But I felt it. I felt the cold, hard certainty of it. In the grand plan for this house, for this family, my name was already being moved to a column marked external. I wasn't angry. More than anything, I was just tired. Tired of living in this place I once called home, holding my breath like a stranger, like an unwelcome guest. I started taking walks to the park near our house. I would take my little notebook with me, the green one I had bought, and sit on a bench, just watching. I watched the young children laughing on the swings, their mothers pushing them higher and higher. I watched the elderly couples walking their dogs, their hands still linked after all these years. And I realized something profound. No one here knew me. To them, I was just another old woman in a faded sweater and worn-out shoes, sitting alone on a park bench. I used to think that growing older meant you would be loved more, cherished more for all the years you had given. But now I understand. To grow old is to slowly, gradually, fade from the vision of the very people whose hands you once held so tightly. For years, I had chosen to forgive. Again and again, I forgave the small slights, the quiet dismissals. But now, I made a different choice. Now, I would choose not to forget. I started printing out all my old bank statements, highlighting every transfer I had ever made to my children. I wasn't planning to ask for the money back. I just wanted a record, a tangible piece of my life, of my sacrifice, that I could hold in my hands. I reached out to an old neighbor, a kind woman who had recently retired from her job as a clerk at the county office. I asked her to explain the process for filing a civil complaint, just in case. I haven't taken any action. I don't plan to, not yet. But it is important to know. It is essential to be prepared. I bought a small USB flash drive. I took photos of all my documents, saved copies of their text messages, and backed up every entry from my little green notebook. Then, I hid the drive where I knew no one would ever think to look, inside an old, dented tea tin that had belonged to my husband. That tea tin. I knew they would never open it. They had no interest in the relics of a past that didn't belong to them. And then, I began to record some of their conversations. I recorded Susan's voice during dinner one night, when she pushed her plate away and said, "This is bland." I recorded the flat, transactional tone in Michael's voice that day. He told me, "Make sure you contribute your Social Security check on time every month. This household has a lot of expenses, you know." I did not cry. I did not get angry. I just remained silent. Because I know now. I know that once trust is fractured, once a crack appears, it can never be repaired with words. From that moment on, words are just wind, blowing past a door that has been closed and locked for good. April 2024. The dogwood trees in the alley behind our house began to bloom, their delicate white petals unfurling slowly, almost hesitantly. A gentle breeze carried them through the air, and one drifted through my open window, landing softly in the palm of my hand. It felt like a fragile whisper, a fleeting attempt to soothe the coldness that had taken root in my heart. That afternoon, the mail arrived, and with it, a tuition bill from Leo's preschool. The payment for the next term was due, $850. Susan brought the envelope to me and held it out, not with a request, but with an expectation. She didn't say please. She didn't need to. Her eyes communicated the silent pressure, the unspoken assumption, "You'll take care of this, won't you?" It was no longer a favor. It was my duty. I remained silent. Without a word, I went to my room and opened the bottom drawer of my old wooden dresser. From the very back, I retrieved an envelope containing the last of my personal savings, money I had been carefully setting aside, month by month. It was my emergency fund, the money I had saved to ensure I wouldn't be a burden to anyone in my final days. But once again, I found myself giving it away. And I did it for one reason, and one reason only, for my grandson. That evening, after dinner, I quietly placed the envelope with the cash on the dining room table, just as I always did. No one said, "Thank you." No one even looked up at me. But my son, Michael, the boy to whom I had once entrusted my entire world, picked up the envelope. He opened it, counted the money, and then he slapped the empty envelope back down on the table. The sound was dry and sharp in the quiet room. "If you don't have any more money, then don't strain yourself," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "Just go back to the country. We can't afford to support someone who just eats and sleeps here anymore." The air in the room seemed to crystallize, to freeze into a solid block of silence. Leo dropped his spoon, and it clattered against the floor, but no one moved to pick it up. I just sat there, in silence. But for the first time in a very, very long time, I did not look down. I did not look down. I looked straight at my son. I met his eyes and I didn't look away. I saw the little baby I had once held in these very arms, a tiny, fragile life that depended on me for everything. I remembered the warmth of the lunch I had packed for him, The time I drove through that terrible thunderstorm in our old station wagon, just to make sure he had something hot to eat at school. I saw it all. A lifetime of love and sacrifice flashing before my eyes. But the tears didn't come. Not this time. It was because, deep inside me, there wasn't even a place left for tears to come from. That well had run dry a long, long time ago. "If I'm going back home to Iowa," I said, and my voice was quiet, but it was as clear and steady as a church bell on a Sunday morning. I let each word hang in the air between us. "Then I'm taking this house with me." My son, Michael, and his wife, Susan, just looked at each other for a moment. And then, a slow, mocking smile spread across their faces. They laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was sharp and cruel, and it cut right through the heavy silence in the room. Susan was the first to speak. "The deed is in our names too, Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Just who do you think you are?" I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. I simply stood up from the table, gathered my plate and my fork, and carried them to the kitchen sink. I washed them, dried them, and put them away. Then, without another word, I turned and walked quietly back to my room. I sat at the little desk in my room all night long. The only light came from the dim bulb in my old reading lamp, casting a small, lonely circle of yellow on the worn wooden surface. I placed my cell phone on the desk in front of me. I didn't turn it on. I just looked at it. I took out the copy of the agreement and I read it again, from the first word to the last. My finger traced the clause. "Mr." Evans had pointed out. The words that had become my shield. I opened my little green notebook and I turned the pages, one by one, reading the entries I had so carefully written down. Each one was a small stone, another weight added to the heavy burden I had carried for so long. And then, when the sun finally came up, I made my decision. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, I picked up the phone, and with a hand that did not tremble, I dialed the number for Mr. Evans. "I would like to formally move to reclaim my full share of the house," I said, my voice firm. I'm ready now. I've made up my mind." When number 4's, the line was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background, the distant sounds of a world that was moving on without me. Then Mr. Evans's calm, steady voice came through the receiver. "I understand, Mrs. Miller," he said. "I'll send you a list of the necessary documents today. Please begin preparing them." I placed the phone back in its cradle and I took a deep breath, a long, slow exhale that seemed to come from the very bottom of my soul. It wasn't a sigh of exhaustion. It was a sigh of release. It felt as if a great weight, a burden I had been carrying on my shoulders for years and years, had finally, at long last, been lifted. I walked over to the window and stepped out onto the small back porch. I looked at the old dogwood tree in the yard and watched the white petals drift down from the branches, carried on the morning breeze. It made me think about how even the things you believe will last forever can be scattered and lost in a single gust of wind. From that day forward, the atmosphere in the house grew even colder, even heavier. Michael barely spoke to me at all. Susan would turn her head and look away whenever I entered a room. And my grandson, Leo, he stopped coming to my room to play anymore. I knew, without having to be told, that someone had told him not to. I'm sure they thought my words that night were just an empty threat, another emotional outburst from a tired old woman. I'm sure they believed that, in time, I would simply forget all about it, that I would go back to being quiet and invisible, just like I always had before. But they didn't know. They didn't know that my silence this time was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of preparation. I began to sort through my belongings, quietly and methodically. I took the old, faded photographs down from the walls, the ones of my husband, Arthur, and a young Michael with his bright, smiling face. I carefully packed away the memories, placing them one by one into cardboard boxes. I took out the wedding dress my mother had left me, a beautiful gown of ivory lace, and I washed it by hand, gently, before wrapping it in a clean linen cloth to protect it. I found a picture of Arthur and me, taken on our honeymoon. I looked at it for a long time, and then I placed it face down in the bottom of a box. It felt like I was closing a door, a heavy, weathered door, and turning the key in the lock for the very last time. I made a phone call to my doctor's office and asked them to print a copy of my medical records from my fall last year. I needed proof. I needed official documentation of the fact that I had been treated like a stranger in my own home, that my pain had been ignored. I also called an old friend of mine, a woman who had worked at the county clerk's office before she retired. I asked her for advice, not about my family, but about the legal process for filing a complaint regarding elder neglect and emotional abuse. I wasn't calling her to cry. I wasn't looking for pity or sympathy. I was simply building a foundation, brick by brick, a legal groundwork that would protect me. I went to the bank and opened a new account, in my name and my name only. I arranged to have my Social Security checks deposited there directly, severing the last financial tie that bound me to them. And every day, I took one more step, just one. Slowly, quietly, I was paving the road that I would walk on, a road that would lead me away from this life. I didn't tell a soul what I was doing. I didn't let anyone see the documents. I didn't breathe a word of my plans. On the outside, nothing had changed. I still cooked their meals. I still cleaned the house. When Leo came home from school, I still offered him a smile, even if it didn't quite reach my eyes anymore. But on the inside, there was nothing left. The part of my heart that had once held love for them was now just an empty space. On the night of April 28th, I was walking through the living room when they suddenly stopped talking. Susan turned her face away, and Michael looked at me with a smirk. "It's no use trying to threaten us, Mom," he said. "This thing with the house? It's not as simple as you think." I just nodded quietly. "You're right," I said. "It isn't. But don't you ever think that just because I'm quiet, it means I don't know anything." And with that, I turned and went back to my room. I could hear their mocking laughter behind me, but this time, it didn't hurt. It sounded like nothing more than the wind rattling an old window pane. That night, I lay down in my bed, just as I always did. Out of habit, I turned to face the wall, my back to the rest of the house. But for some reason, I couldn't close my eyes. I couldn't sleep. I could hear the faint sound of the television from the living room, and underneath it, the low murmur of their voices. They were speaking softly, but the words were perfectly clear. "If she really does something," Susan whispered, "do you think it'll reduce our share?" "No way," Michael replied. "She's just talking. She hasn't done a thing in all these years. Why would she start now?" They spoke about me as if I were a piece of old, inconvenient furniture, something not quite worth the trouble of throwing out, but too much of a hassle to deal with legally, so it was just left to sit in a corner and gather dust. I didn't feel sadness. All I felt was a profound coldness. It was the kind of cold you feel when you realize that the last little ember of warmth you've been clinging to has finally, quietly, gone out. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin and hugged the small, faded pillow I kept on my bed. It was a pillow I'd had since I lived back in Iowa, and if I breathed in deeply, I could still smell the faint, sweet scent of lavender from the times I'd set it out to dry in the sun. And then, without making a sound, I whispered a name into the darkness. "Arthur, if you were still here, would things have turned out like this?" I wasn't looking for an answer. I just wanted to say his name. I just wanted to remember the one person in my entire life who had ever put his hand on my shoulder and said to me, "You are not a burden. You could never be a burden." I turned my face to the wall and closed my eyes. And for that one moment, in the quiet darkness of my room, I wasn't just the leftover person in the house. I was a mother. I was a wife. I was a person who had once been loved, who had once been needed. I was someone who mattered. And I decided then and there that starting tomorrow, I would not be silent anymore. In early May of 2024, I received a phone call from Mr. Evans. His voice was calm, unhurried, but there was a new kind of strength in it, a clear and certain tone. "The court has ruled to invalidate a portion of the transfer agreement," he said. The decision was based on the evidence of emotional abuse and a violation of the terms of cohabitation. After we hung up, I just sat there for a long time, still holding the phone in my hand. I wasn't stunned. I was just listening. Listening to a sound I had never heard before, a deep and profound quiet inside my own chest. It was the sound of the calm after a very long storm. The official court documents arrived by courier. I opened the envelope and I signed my name on the designated line. My hand was perfectly steady. My heart was completely sure. With that one piece of paper, the 50% share of the house that I had signed away all those years ago was officially returned to me. I was, once again, the sole legal owner of my home. I had prepared for this moment. I had armed myself with facts, with legal grounds, and with something else. Something I had spent nearly 80 years of my life slowly cultivating: courage. Mr. Evans asked me a final question. Will you be keeping the house, Mrs. Niller? Or do you have other intentions? I answered him without a single moment of hesitation. I'm selling it, I said. There is no reason to hold on to a place that no longer feels like home. The sale was finalized within the week. The buyers were a young couple. The husband was a teacher, and his wife was expecting their first child. They told the real estate agent that they had fallen in love with the sunny backyard and the warm, welcoming feel of the house. I remember imagining a future for this house. A future filled not with the suffocating silence and the deep, invisible wounds of the past, but with the sound of laughter. When I pictured that, even for a moment, I remember the feeling of relief that washed over me, a profound peace that settled deep in my bones. But there were still things that had to be done. My journey wasn't over yet. Through my lawyer, Mr. Evans, I arranged for a formal legal notice to be sent. I instructed him to draft it with language that was calm and professional, respectful even, but which conveyed my intentions with absolute, unshakable clarity. 2. Michael Miller and Susan Miller Sher from Margaret Miller. This letter is to formally notify you that I, Margaret Miller, am the sole legal and rightful owner of the residential property located at 123 Dogwood Lane, Levittown, New York, D28 TAS. As of the date of this letter, I have initiated proceedings for the transfer and sale of the aforementioned property. In accordance with state law, you are hereby required to prepare to vacate the premises within 14 days of receipt of this notice. 2. Should the property not be vacated by the specified deadline, I will be compelled to initiate formal legal proceedings for eviction, which will be carried out by the appropriate authorities. Che. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation in this matter. Sincerely, Miss Merce, am Margaret Miller. I had them print 2 copies of the notice. One was sent by Mr. Evans's office via certified mail, the official channel. The other copy, bearing the bright red, circular stamp of the postmark, I placed carefully into a new file folder. It was for my own personal records, a final piece of evidence in a case I had been building for years inside my own heart. That afternoon, I went into the kitchen. I took out my old ceramic teapot, the one Arthur had given me for our 10th anniversary, and I carefully brewed a pot of tea. I set it on the dining room table with a single cup and saucer. It felt like a ritual, a quiet ceremony marking a moment of passage. But I wasn't celebrating, and I certainly wasn't gloating. I just sat there, in the silence, because what I was taking back wasn't just a physical space, a house made of wood and nails and plaster. No, it was something far more precious, something that had been trampled on by the feet of others for 15 long years. What I was finally reclaiming was my own dignity. 2 days later, after dinner, an opened envelope lay on the dining room table. My son, Michael, was holding the letter in his hand. His eyes were red, raw from either anger or unshed tears. I couldn't be sure. His voice when he spoke was a choked, hoarse whisper. "Mom, are you really going to do this?" I looked at him, my expression calm, and I gave a single, slow nod. My daughter-in-law, Susan, said nothing at all. A cold, thin smile played on her lips as she turned and walked back to their bedroom, shutting the door with a sharp, definitive crack. I suppose that was her way of ending the conversation. That was her final word on the matter. No one apologized. No one asked me for a reason. Not a single person in that house asked me why. They were angry only about one thing: the fact that I had finally, after all these years, stood up for myself. The next morning, I went to the real estate office to finalize the paperwork. I reviewed the property appraisal and the purchase and sale agreement. Mr. Evans was right there beside me, his presence a quiet source of strength. Together, we went through every single clause, every line of fine print. He explained each legal term in plain English until he was sure I understood it completely. I was no longer the ignorant old woman they had imagined me to be, the woman who would sign anything they put in front of her. I am Margaret Miller. After 15 years of silence, I am the one rewriting the final chapter of my own life with my own two hands. When I returned home, the air inside the house had changed completely. It was thick with a new kind of cold, a palpable, heavy silence that clung to the walls. No one greeted me at the door. My grandson Leo wouldn't even meet my eyes. And dinner, they no longer waited for me. My days fell into a new, solitary rhythm. I cooked for one. I ate by myself. I washed a single plate, a single fork, a single glass. And yet, for the first time in as long as I could remember, my heart was calm. I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. I began to quietly pack my things. I sorted through my clothes, my books, the old photographs that held a lifetime of memories. I packed everything neatly into cardboard boxes, labeling each one with a black marker. I called a moving company and scheduled the move for May 28th, the day after the official deadline for them to vacate the house. The place I'll be moving to is a small condominium near the center of town in Montclair. It's a lovely spot, with big windows that let in plenty of sunlight. There's a beautiful park just a few blocks away, a little independent bookstore I've always liked, and a medical clinic right around the corner. It's a quiet place, a place where I know I can finally feel safe. I'm not asking for much. I never have. All I ever wanted was a space where I could live out my final years in peace. One day, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. It was Michael. He asked in that same hoarse voice, strained with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Mom, can't you reconsider about the house?" I looked up from the box I was packing and met his gaze. My voice was quiet, but it was steady. "When I gave you money all those years, Michael, you never tried to negotiate with me. You just took it. So, I don't see why I should have to negotiate with you now, when I'm finally taking something back." He had no reply. He just stood there in the doorway, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and said nothing. I turned back to my task, carefully placing my old notebooks into a box. They were the only things I had decided I would definitely take with me. The tears don't come anymore. My hopes can no longer be shattered. I am simply living. For the first time in my entire life, I am living for myself. Some people might call me cold. Others might whisper that I'm heartless, cruel even. But no one, not a single person ever bothered to ask. No one ever stopped to wonder what a mother must have endured, what she must have silently suffered through for so many years, to finally reach the point where she was willing to let everything go. Ever since I sent that letter, the sound of laughter has completely vanished from this house. The television is often on, but nobody is watching it. The lights in the kitchen burn brightly late into the night, but at the dinner table, there is nothing but a cold, heavy silence. I still wake up at the same time every morning. I make a simple breakfast for myself, and I brew a single cup of tea. Then I go and sit by the window, in the corner of the living room where I can see the tall maple trees lining the street, their new leaves fluttering in the May breeze. I just sit there, alone and in silence. Susan almost never comes into the kitchen anymore. Michael has started coming home later and later from work. On the rare occasions when we do all sit down for a meal together, the air is so heavy, so thick with unspoken resentment, that it feels hard to breathe. One night, I heard them arguing behind their closed bedroom door. Their voices were muffled, but I could still make out the words. "You told me she couldn't do anything," Susan hissed. I never thought she would actually go this far. Michael stammered in reply. I didn't want to hear any more. I turned and walked away. Back in my own room, I opened the bottom drawer of my old wooden dresser and took out a handkerchief Arthur had given me when we were first married. It was old and worn, the delicate embroidery on the corner faded with time, but I had always washed it by hand and folded it carefully before putting it away. On top of that small square of cloth, I gently laid the signed purchase and sale agreement for the house. It wasn't to show off. It wasn't an act of defiance. It was just for me, a quiet reminder to myself. I will not be silent anymore. The next day, I went out and bought a new suitcase. It was a sturdy, dark blue one with 4 wheels that spun smoothly in any direction. The sales clerk smiled at me. Going on a trip? She asked. I smiled back. Yes, I replied. The longest trip of my life. I didn't say anything more than that. But I knew, in my heart, what this really was. This wasn't just a move. I was finally leaving this place I had once called home. This house that, day by day, had made my presence feel smaller and smaller, that had stolen my voice and tried to wither my pride. I was leaving it all behind. On my way home, I made one more purchase. It was a small, potted white orchid. I had always loved them, but I had never, not once, bought a flower for myself. I brought it home and placed it gently on the little desk in my room, next to my old reading lamp and a small stack of books. Because I know something now. I know that even though I am leaving this house, what I will be taking with me is not the darkness. It is a small piece of the light that was once here. May 30th, 2024. It had been raining since morning. Not a heavy downpour, but a quiet, steady rain that rustled the leaves on the trees and left dark, wet streaks on the side of the house. I sat by the window holding the small pot with the white orchid in my lap. I'd brought it home exactly 1 week ago. Now, it was in full bloom, its pristine petals opened wide like a silent, wordless blessing. At 9 o'clock sharp, the green moving truck pulled up in front of the house. 2 young men got out and began to wordlessly carry my boxes out to the truck. My sofa, my refrigerator, the boxes filled with my books. And then, the dining room table and chairs that I had bought so many years ago, back when this house was still a home. No one said a word to me. Not a single person turned to look back. My son, Michael, walked right past me in his faded jacket. My daughter-in-law, Susan, pulled a large suitcase behind her. Her face so cold you would never guess she had lived in this house for 15 years. There was no goodbye. No apology. Not one of them even bothered to say, "Take care." There was only the sound of the door as it closed for the last time. A single, sharp click. It was a sound that seemed to sever the chain of what we had once called family. In the quietest, most brutal way possible. I did not cry. I did not watch them leave. I simply sat in my chair, quietly tracing the edge of the tablecloth with my finger, as if I were smoothing out the empty air they had left behind. That same afternoon, I signed the contract to transfer the ownership of the house. The final appraised value was $480,000. The buyers were a young couple who had come to view the house a few weeks before. They had an excitement about them, a glow of happiness that reminded me of the day Arthur and I first chose a home to live in together. I smiled as I shook their hands, and I said to them, "Please, make many warm memories in this house." And then, I walked out of that house and into the rain, quietly, and I never once looked back. Because I knew, if I allowed myself to look back even for a moment, my resolve might have broken. The place I moved to was a small apartment in Montclair, New Jersey, about a 7-minute walk from the train station. It's on the 2nd floor, and it gets wonderful sunlight. The walls are painted a clean, bright white, and the floors are a warm, natural wood. And it has a small balcony. It is a space for me to grow flowers, or to sit and read a book. A space that is entirely, completely my own. There are no angry voices here. There are no impatient eyes demanding that I cook a meal. There is no entitled attitude that says, "Isn't that just what you're supposed to do?" There is only me, and the quiet. I moved into this new place at the beginning of June. I brought with me 2 cardboard boxes of books, a few changes of clothes, a small radio, and, faded by the long passage of time, the wedding photograph of my husband, Arthur, and me. I did not need anything more. The money I had left from the sale of the house, I decided to divide and use for 2 specific purposes. The first fund, I donated $20,000 to the local community hospital. It was the same hospital where I had received treatment for my spine, and it was a place where, years ago, I had seen an elderly woman sitting in the hallway, crying because she couldn't afford to pay for her week-long stay. I included a simple, handwritten letter with the donation. I do not have much to give, but I was once a mother who was rejected by her own family at the very moment he needed them most. I hope that this small gift might help someone else feel, even for a short time, that they are not alone. The second fund. I transferred $13,500 into the bank account of a certain nurse. On that day, the day I fell and couldn't get back up, she was the one who, more quietly than anyone, took my hand and stayed with me all the way to the examination room. She had said to me, "What elderly people need isn't someone shouting at them, telling them what to do. Sometimes, all they need is for someone to gently hold their hand when they're in pain. That's enough." I have never forgotten the look in her eyes. I wasn't able to thank her properly back then. But now, at last, I could. On June 15th, I went to the county office and filled out the paperwork to formally change my legal address, removing my name from the records of my old home, and at the same time, I had my son removed as my legal dependent and next of kin. I am not starting a fight. I am not filing a lawsuit. I was simply, quietly, putting my own life's records in order. The young clerk at the window looked over the forms and then looked up at me. Are you really sure about this, ma'am?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded. "For 79 years, I said, I lived my life full of uncertainty. But now I can decide for myself that this is what is right. Every morning, I wake up at 6 o'clock. I make myself a cup of tea. I open the window, and I listen to the sound of the little birds that come to visit my balcony. I planted some new lavender in a pot out there. It's the same scent that I remember from my childhood home in Iowa. My mother always used to plant it in pots all around the kitchen door. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I feel as if someone is whispering softly in my ear. My child, it's all right to rest when you're tired, but you don't have to live a life that is only about enduring. I've started writing in a journal every day. Not very much, just a few lines. It's raining today, but inside my heart, it's sunny. A 79-year-old grandma walked a mile and a half today without her cane. No one notices. But no one can hurt me. One day, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a text message from my grandson Leo. "Grandma, where are you living now? I miss your special scrambled eggs." I didn't reply right away. I just paused for a long time, my hand resting on the phone's keyboard. And then, I typed my response. "Grandma is thinking of you too, sweetie. But I think when you get a little bigger, you'll understand. You'll understand why Grandma had to leave." I don't blame my grandson. I have no intention of blaming a child for his childhood. I only hope. I hope that one day, when that boy becomes a man, he will not inherit the way his parents once treated me. He will not carry that forward. In my little apartment, the wind sometimes howls at night. I can hear the neighbor's cat meowing, and the old refrigerator makes a soft clicking sound as it runs. But I have never, not for a single moment, felt lonely. Because for the first time, I am living my own life, without expecting anything from anyone, without waiting for someone else to love me. I am simply, finally, living for myself. My first month in the new apartment passed in a quiet yet deeply fulfilling peace. Slowly, I began to get used to this new town. It was a peaceful, residential neighborhood. There was a small gift shop tucked away between 2 apartment buildings, and an old used bookstore, the kind with that wonderful dusty smell of paper and time. It was run by a kind, white-haired man who loved to talk about the short stories of Raymond Carver. In the late afternoons, I would often find myself wandering into his shop, settling into the old wooden chair he kept by the window, and slowly turning the pages of whichever book I happened to pick up. It was a time that was never interrupted, a space where no one ever hurried me, a place where I was free from the heavy burden of feeling like I had to be useful to someone. One afternoon, the owner of the bookstore asked me quietly, "Don't you ever get lonely living by yourself?" I smiled and gave him my answer. "Loneliness," I said, "is what you feel when you're surrounded by family, but your heart is all alone. When you can be by yourself and feel at peace, that is a quiet kind of happiness." The owner just nodded, and then he reached under the counter and handed me a new, empty notebook with a plain brown cover. "If you ever decide to write something in there," he said, "I would be honored to be your first reader." I accepted the notebook with a grateful heart. When I got home, I placed it gently on my desk, right next to the vase where I kept a single, perfect white orchid. Then, one day, a postcard arrived in my mailbox from a most unexpected sender. It was from a woman who used to be my neighbor back in Levittown. The postcard was filled with neat, careful handwriting. "Dear Margaret, I recently heard about what happened. For all those years, I watched you endure everything in silence, and I am so ashamed of myself for never saying a word. I suppose everyone just assumed that you would be fine. We all thought you were so strong that no one ever thought to ask you if you were in pain. If you ever have the chance, please come and visit me upstate. We don't have to do anything special. We can just look at the flowers, have some cake, and talk." To this day, I still keep the wedding photograph of you and Arthur. Looking at your smiling face in that picture, a thought came to me, clear as day. I thought, this is the kind of person who truly deserves to live a life of lightness and ease. I held that postcard to my chest and couldn't move for a long time. That everyone had forgotten me. That if I were to disappear, not a single soul would even notice. I felt a little ashamed of myself for Horka 7, having believed that, even in the silence, there was someone who had been watching over me, who had truly seen me. On the morning of a different day, I was tidying up the contents of a small wooden box. Inside, nestled among old letters and keepsakes, was a birthday card I had received for my 70th birthday. Back then, our family was still whole, our home still filled with laughter. I remembered my son, Michael, hugging me so tightly as he gave me the card, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom," he had said, "you are the most amazing person in my entire life." I picked up the card, my fingers tracing the familiar shape of it. I stared at the handwriting from all those years ago, a little clumsy perhaps, but so honest, so direct. There was no anger left in me. There was only a quiet acceptance that time had passed, and that everything, absolutely everything, had changed. I took out a fresh envelope from my desk drawer. On a clean sheet of paper, I wrote a single sentence. "If the day ever comes when you try to understand what it means to be a mother, please read the words written here." I placed that small, folded note next to the little green notebook I had been keeping. I had no intention of ever sending it to anyone. It was something I simply needed to tuck away in the deepest corner of my own heart. It wasn't about holding a grudge. It wasn't about trying to get back what I had lost. It was about making a choice. The choice not to forget. My apartment is still the same as it always has been these past few months. It's a place where the morning sun streams through the window, where the gentle aroma of brewing tea fills the air. It is a place of such profound quiet that I can clearly hear the sound of my own heart beating. I am no longer living my life to prove my worth to anyone. I am simply living quietly now, so that I can finally, at long last, set down the heavy burdens I have carried on my back for so many, many years. I am no longer the woman who sits in silence at the family dinner table, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak to her. I am no longer the mother who believed that handing over money with trembling hands was the same thing as offering love. Now, I live alone. In a small apartment near the train station in Montclair. No one wakes me up in the morning. No one demands that I cook for them. No one dares to call me useless just because my body is feeling unwell. There is only me here, and a quiet peace. a tranquility I have never once experienced in my entire life. Every day, I write just a few lines in my journal, not for anyone else to read, but to remind myself, to teach my own heart that I am still here, that I am still alive. Today, the sky was overcast, but inside my heart, the sun was shining. I tried making drip coffee for the first time. I wanted the morning to feel new. At the park, I saw an elderly couple walking hand in hand. They didn't notice me, but seeing them, I found myself smiling, just naturally. One rainy afternoon, I stopped by my usual used bookstore. The owner, a kind, elderly man, handed me a small collection of poetry. Tucked inside its pages was a folded slip of paper. On it, he had written, "A person like you is quiet and graceful, like the bamboo that bends in the wind but never breaks." I said nothing. I simply gave him a deep, grateful nod. It had been such a long time, a truly long time, since anyone had called me strong. The only words that had been directed at me for years were, old, weak, out of touch. Then there was another day. I was sitting in a small neighborhood cafe, and I happened to overhear the conversation of two young women at the table next to mine. "I'm so scared of getting old," one of them said. "It's like my parents just abandoned me. My mother-in-law, nobody pays any attention to her, and she always looks so lonely." I didn't turn around. I didn't interrupt them. I just thought to myself, quietly, in my own heart, growing old is not what's frightening. What is truly frightening is to continue being treated as insignificant, even after you have lived so many years. I was once the mother who endured in silence. I was the wife who devoted herself completely. I was the grandmother who tried her best never to be a bother. But now, I finally understand. Love is not about tolerating everything. Forgiveness is not about allowing the same mistakes to be made against you over and over again. And sacrifice, if it is never understood or appreciated, eventually becomes nothing more than a heavy stone that will crush your own spirit. I don't hold a grudge against my son, but I do have regrets. I regret that I never taught him the meaning of gratitude. And I regret that by making him believe that a mother was a presence who would absolutely, under no circumstances, ever leave him, I failed to teach him how to truly cherish someone. I don't blame my daughter-in-law either. When people come from different backgrounds, their values will naturally be different. But all I ever wished for, all I ever hoped for, was that she would be someone who stood on the same side as me, not someone who needed to be carried, but someone who would walk alongside me. I am not living for revenge. I have no intention of trying to take back what I gave, because to me, those things were never alone. I simply stopped. I stopped giving any more. I stopped expecting anything in return. I stopped trying to make an exchange. That is all. I left nothing behind for them, except for a single sheet of paper. I have, both legally and emotionally, ended my connection to the people I have, until now, called family. However, if a day ever comes when you feel regret, please do not crush that feeling. Do not push it away. A sorry that arrived late is worth so much more than an eternal silence. If you are listening to this story right now, and if you are a parent who has been told you are no longer useful simply because you have grown old, if you are being treated like an intruder in the very house you built, I understand how you feel. I know, because that was me. And that is why I want to tell you this. We were not born into this world to serve as the foundation for someone else's happiness. Just because we loved them does not mean we are obligated to live the rest of our lives in silence. Please, the time you have left, this final chapter of your life, protect it, for the sake of your own dignity. And if you are listening to this story from the position of a child, Hoyame, I am not blaming you, but I have just one request. Right now, go and place a hand on your mother's shoulder and ask her this. Mom, are you okay? Please say that one sentence while your mother is still alive, while she is still here, before you find yourself one day, after she is gone, flipping through an old photo album and regretting, wondering, why didn't those eyes ever look at me? My name is Margaret. I am no longer living to prove anything. I am living now simply because I want to finally, at the very end of this long life, attain a quietness where I can feel that it's okay not to be strong anymore. Had you ever felt that your parent was a burden? Or are you, the one in your home who is quietly, continuously being hurt, without anyone ever noticing? If you are willing, please tell me your story. To speak is the first step toward freeing yourself, and perhaps that one word from you might be the very thing that stops someone's lonely tears at this very moment. Please share your thoughts in the comments section. We promise, we read every single one. If, among them, there is even just one word that can save a mother who is crying in silence, then the existence of this space is, for that reason alone, more than enough. No one, not a single person, is born into this world to be looked down upon, and no one grows old just to be forgotten by their own family.